So my family was living in the Bronx, since you know the Bronx, 167th Street and Boston Road,
Okay.
near, oh shoot, what's the high school that's over there? But anyway, in the South Bronx. And when, I don't know, when I was in my preschool years and my mom wanted to check out the local elementary school to see where her child would be attending. My mom's from Michigan, not accustomed to city schools or New York City schools. And she walked into the, the local school and, immediately detected an odor of urine in the hallway. And it was like, no, my child's not going here. So, so for preschool, I went to private school. I guess it was probably suggested by a neighbor of ours who had an older child in the school, but it was a private school in Manhattan. You may have heard of the Walden School, Central Park West. I went there for preschool. Trying to make a long story medium here, and the teachers advised my parents. I don't know if there was an IQ test or it was just their sense that I needed to go to a really good school. So my parents somehow heard about the Scarsdale school system as having a really, fabulous reputation. They had been, looking at, places to move in the suburbs. I think they had their eyes on someplace in Yonkers for a while. But then when they learned about the Yonkers school system, that wasn't so hot. So, so somehow they connected, I think it was through some friends in Mount Vernon. They connected with we're referred to a real estate investor / broker who had a number of properties throughout Westchester County. And as it turned out, had some parcels available in Scarsdale. And last night after we talked, I went to bed trying to remember this guy's name because I remember meeting him. I was like 5 at the time. But his name was Mr. Cooley, Walter K. Cooley. And I remember him being an older gentleman with white or gray hair, very nice, white gentleman who apparently had no qualms about selling property to Black people in Scarsdale. Now, he owned, I'm thinking you've probably become very familiar if you weren't already with Saxon Woods Road since you started this project. So at that time, he owned 3 adjacent parcels from where Black Birch Lane is now.
Yes.
That didn't exist at the time, but right. From like basically the White Plains border, the 3, properties back to back. He had already sold the property closest to what's now Black Birch to a biracial family. And I can remember vaguely him introducing us to this family who had already built their home there about a year earlier. They had a daughter my age, who was a year older than I am, who was attending Heathcote. And actually they owned that lot, the lot next door, and then the lot next to that, directly 177 Saxon Woods Road, directly across the street from the entrance to the park, to the, was that Saxon Woods Park?
Yes.
That was the lot that was available. So, so I actually, so you pulled me away from the work I was supposed to be doing this morning. I did a deep dive in the deed registry and found our deed recording.
Oh.
From Walter K. Cooley to Marcus and Sheppy Moore, dated March 3rd, 1955. And he had sold the property to the biracial couple. This was George and Cecilia George. I'm sorry, Emmett and Cecilia George. He sold them their property December 14th, 1953. And just jumping ahead for a minute, the Georges ultimately sold the middle lot between us to a Black couple by the name of Lonnie and George Thomas, and that was in 1961. And so essentially you had three Black families in a row.
Right.
At the end of Saxon Woods Road. The Thomases didn't build for many years. They lived in the city. They would come up on Sundays and kind of, park their car in the lot and just, envision what was to come. But they eventually bought and had a home there. So the house was completed in February of '56. February 14th, I remember we moved in. It was Valentine's Day. But meantime, I had already started school at Heathcote that fall, that September of 1955. I started kindergarten. Our house was supposed to have been finished just in time for me to enroll in school, but there was a hurricane, something that delayed construction.
Okay.
But I was allowed to begin school because we already owned the property, we were paying taxes. It was okay. So I used to commute from the Bronx for the several months. I remember to this day coming up Bronx River Parkway, pulling off Weaver Street exit,
Who drove you? Your mom?
Yeah, mom would drive me up. And my father still had his office in the Bronx.
The dental practice.
Dental practice, right. And, and at that time, nowadays that part of Saxon Woods Road was in the Heathcote School District. Now it's in the Quaker Ridge District. But just to give you a picture of Saxon Woods Road, and you may have gotten this from George Peterson or someone else already, but
please.
Mid-50s, this probably explains why Black people could live here, because in the mid-50s, Saxon Woods Road was extremely rural. I bet 10 years earlier, it was a dirt road.
Yeah.
And it was very rural, and it was also very isolated because you came in off of Mamaroneck Road. You couldn't get out of Saxon Woods Road at that point without going across the White Plains border and into White Plains. Mm-hmm. So there was no Secor Farms had not developed that far close, if you know Secor Farms, that close to Saxon Woods Road yet. So we were surrounded by woods, nothing.
Yeah.
So when you came down Saxon Woods Road from Mamaroneck Avenue, on the left, there was a house at the corner. A few hundred yards down on the left, there was a fairly contemporary house high on a hill. And then there was nothing. You saw Scarsdale Golf Club on one side, on the right, nothing but woods on the left. You got about halfway down, there was a farm where there was a couple, sort of like hippies before there were hippies, farm, and they kept, you remember that, Mom? The folks who had the farm on Saxon Woods Road, and they had a llama. Mom would talk about the llama sometimes escaping and running down the street. There was an beautiful old antique red barn near the side of the road that burned down maybe a year after we moved on the street. And anyway, you passed all that, nothing. And then on the right-hand side, you came to the Parnell house, the Pitt house, the Peterson house. Next to the Petersons were a house that at the time belonged to a family with the last name Houston, also Black. And that house was a relatively big house. It was torn down years ago, but according to lore, it was the basement of that house that was on the Underground Railroad. And I can remember going to somebody's birthday party in that basement also, but it was a very old basement. Houston's moved at some point early on, maybe in the early 60s, and whoever bought the house tore down that house and built another one. I don't know if the basement still exists or not. That would be interesting to know. And then after that, there was another lady on the house down to the right, just before the entrance to Saxon Woods Park. Anyway, I say all this to say, this probably explains why back in the 1800s, somebody said, let's make this an area where we can move the Black folks to.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't like central Scarsdale. I mean, this was like remote. And then the entrance to, what's that, Benedict Road? It was just, it wasn't cut through yet. And then after that was our house, or where we built our house on the left-hand side.
Mhm.
So, so that just sort of gives you the lay of the land and why I expect nobody cared who lived down there. It was just a remote.
Right.
So, so anyway, I do remember, yeah, started school at Heathcote.
Were there any other Black students there?
Pardon?
Were there any other Black? Because the other kids went
It
to
was
Quaker
me.
Ridge.
It was me. It was me and my biracial neighbor. And she was a year ahead of me until, well, in first grade, in mid first grade, I was skipped to second grade.
Okay.
So at that point, we were in the same, not in the same classroom, but the same, you know, same grade. But it was just the two of us through elementary school and junior high school. And so the Parnells, the Pitts, I didn't go to school with them until we got to high school, because at that time, Quaker Ridge went K through 8.
Right.
So, yeah. So, you know, we saw each other, you know, weekends, other times and so on, but we were not, I didn't see them every day because we weren't in the same school.
Right.
So Helen Parnell and Sharon Pitt were in my class starting in the 9th grade. And I can remember, well, Helen and I were in the same homeroom, and our homeroom teacher was a Black woman whose name I can't remember.
Huh.
I think she was a French teacher. I didn't have her for any classes, but we had her for homeroom, I think, freshman and sophomore year. And I remember at the time thinking that was coincidental. Probably not.
And I also saw 2 pictures from 64 and 65, and it looks like they put you and Helen together in homeroom both years. Well, 64 and 65.
Yeah.
Probably, again, also not a coincidence.
Right. And I can recall at least one teacher, you know, mixing up our names. Now, I'm 5'9.5". Helen was like 4'9". Okay. But anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway. So yeah, Helen and I think both freshman and sophomore year were in the same homeroom. The only other Black teacher, I'm jumping around here, that I recall at Scarsdale at the time, and this was maybe not until my junior or senior year, was a man by the name of Mr. French or Dr. French, who taught English. I didn't have him in any of my classes, but I remember he was a very striking, dignified figure. Might have been, in retrospect, Caribbean in background. I think I recall a little bit of an accent. But anyway, yeah, elementary school was a great experience. I loved elementary school, and it was, I didn't realize at the time. I thought, everyone had the same school experience, but I mean, such a dedication of teachers and parents. I mean, it was both an age as well as an economic circumstances where mothers didn't work.
Right.
So all the mothers were heavily involved in school activities and after school, this and that. As you pointed out, my mom was a Girl Scout leader. And it's interesting to this day when, I go to high school reunions. I mean, all my fellow, Girl Scouts, how's Mrs. Moore? I love Mrs. Moore. So it wasn't until junior high school, really, and then it was junior high, not middle school. So junior high in those days was 6, 7, and 8. And in fact, I was in the first 6th grade class that started at the new junior high school. For that matter, I was in the 3rd class that started at Heathcote School after that was built. But junior high school, you start being aware of, race as being something more than, it's not just, okay, different colors in the crayon box kind of thing. There's more social and political, aspects to that. And I think you said George Parnell made some mention of this, but what struck me the most was here we are, entering puberty, and all of a sudden this, girls are talking about boys and who's cute and who likes whom and blah, 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 blah. I was excluded from those conversations. Or when I say excluded, I mean, I could be sitting at the same lunch table while, the girls are talking, but I'm not really I'm sort of like being ignored in the conversation.
Yeah.
That wasn't something, Yeah. And so that was interesting to me. I mean, this was, it was never, said that, Shelley, you can't like
Right.
white boys, or white boys aren't supposed to like you, but it's just one of those things that you intuit.
Right.
Based on the society you live in. So that was hurtful. That was hurt. Yeah, that was hard.
I mean, I'll bet with all those girls.
High school. I mean, high school, I mean, I didn't go to my prom because there was no one to invite me to my prom. So yeah, that was a little hard. I do remember one friend of mine, Helen's next younger brother, Jerry, who I think was just a year behind us. I remember one girl asking me, well, do you like Jerry? Like,
Let's just pick someone out of random.
Yeah, Jerry. So that was interesting. So what else can I say? Overall, my experience with teachers and so on was very positive, although I remember in junior high, I think it was 8th grade history, American history. I think there was like one 45-minute class, maybe not even the whole class, but at most one class that was devoted to the subject of slavery.
Right.
So I can remember when that subject came up, and I remember feeling a little self-conscious. So, I'm trying to, just sit at my desk and be invisible. And the teacher, who was an, older white lady, out of nowhere says, she's saying, it was a, not a good time in American history, blah, blah, all the right things. And she said, and Shelley, do you have any comments about that? Like, oh, I already wanted to, be under my desk, and she's like, calling me out. So that stands out in my mind. It was like, but my thinking, I'm like, no, I have no comment. I have never been a slave. Okay. So anyway, that was like kind of a strange moment. So I made a list of like just moments.
Yeah.
9th grade, I had a biology teacher who was an uncharacteristically bad Scarsdale teacher. In retrospect, I don't know if he was a drinker or what, but he was just, he just brought nothing to the classroom, really. And I remember early in the semester, he asked us to do some papers that we turned into him. He never graded them and turned them back. And we got to the point where we were teasing them, are we getting our papers back today? And so anyway, I remember my mother telling me that when my parents went for, what do they call it? Parents' night, whatever it is, to, talk with each of our teachers, and they went into his classroom and said, oh, how's our daughter doing? And I never forget my mom telling me the next day that he said, well, she's doing as well as can be expected. And my mom's like, what do you mean by that? And apparently he was just kind of sheepish at that point, but like, wow. So, yeah, so my parents, who are not easily offended, they were very offended by that comment. What else in high school? Just looking at my notes here. Yeah, I think I mentioned that, when I saw, Helen and Sharon, in the classroom. It was my first time ever seeing Black kids in the classroom.
Wow.
I mean, I don't have a mirror, so it was the first time I'm seeing, So, and it was just, this is silly, but I remember thinking, wow, I sit at desks and take notes like everybody else. And, you know, I mean, there were probably white kids thinking the same thing. But here I am thinking, like, having that same observation, like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is, yeah, just like, you know, everything. Oh, crazy. So ninth grade, I get a note, somebody hands me a note in the classroom saying, Mr. Hazeltine in the drama department, would like to see you after school. I'm like, okay. So I go to the drama department and I meet Mr. Hazeltine, who I think is still living. When I get there, my memory is a little fuzzy, but Helen was in the room. Either she was still in the room or she was bolting from the room. I'm like, what's going on? Anyway, the drama club was getting ready to put on a production of The Crucible, and they needed somebody to play the maid/slave Tituba. So he had asked that Shelley and Helen, I don't know if Sharon was in this or not, I just remember Helen, to come by the drama club to see if we could be recruited to play the role of Tituba. So I just remember Helen fleeing, but I stayed because I was fascinated. I'm like, oh, and I think partly because I had been fascinated with the drama club at Scarsdale High School ever since, I'm going on a tangent, but ever since junior high, when I had gone to a production of The Diary of Anne Frank, okay, which starred Judy Garland's daughter. So like all of Scarsdale showed up to this, high school play. And Garland's daughter being Liza Minnelli, right, who was a kid at the time. But, Judy Garland was living in Scarsdale and Liza Minnelli was at Scarsdale High School. And yeah, she tried out for the part. And so anyway, ever since that production, not only because of Judy Garland's daughter, my mom had to explain, you remember the Wizard of Oz and the little guy? Okay, this is her daughter. But just because it was a really good production. I mean, it was really riveting. So anyway, here I am being asked to be in a play at Scarsdale High School. So it was like, I didn't care what the part was. Okay. Fortunately, the part of Tituba was a respectable part. I mean, I wasn't just some minstrel or buffoon or, it was a strong role of someone who happened to be a slave. But anyway, from that point forward, I was in that play and I was involved in the drama club ever since. Now, like an idiot, I think it was the following year, I tried out for a play. I don't remember what the play was, but I think it took place in Austria in the 30s or 40s. And it was like everybody in the play was Austrian. And I tried out for the role of Mrs. whomever who was Austrian. And I remember drama director coming to me afterwards, Shelley, that was a nice read, but you can't play an Austrian. I'm like, and I just remember feeling so embarrassed, like, why didn't I get that, So anyway, it wasn't one of these avant-garde things where anybody can play anything. No, it was supposed to.
Hamilton was still about 50 years off.
For Austrian. So that I wasn't hurt so much as I was just embarrassed by not getting it. What else? The basketball coach tried to, or the PE teacher tried to recruit me to the basketball team because, I mean, she's tall, she's black, duh. I had no interest in playing basketball and I just had no competitive spirit. So that didn't happen. I did play intramural basketball for a little while, but nah. Maybe my junior year, they started a track and field team, and that caught my interest because I didn't think I knew at the time, but several years prior, in 1960, Wilma Rudolph was like, 1960 Olympics was all the rage. She was a star, America's sweetheart. She was a tall black girl. I'm like, oh, kind of fit that bill. Maybe I could do that. But I remember being left in the dust, competing against mainly other Black girls at Woodlands and White Plains and all these other schools. And I'm a sports fan to this day, I think largely because I'm not an athlete, but I'm a sports fan, spectator, because the only occasions I got to see a critical mass of Black people in my town was at football games, basketball games, when the fans of the competing teams were there. Again, you had White Plains, Roosevelt High School, what was some of the others in our conference? Rye, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle. I mean, so I would just go to, oh, I'm around other Black people. That's wonderful. So to this day, I'm a sports fan just because that got me interested in the sport as well as the crowd.
Let me ask you, when you saw all those Black people, the players and the fans, did a part of you feel either envious or like I wonder what it would be like to be in that school?
Yeah, to sit on the other side of the garden and be, there was a little of that.
Enough that you'd really want to, or just out of curiosity?
I mean, I had no serious desire to switch schools.
Right, yeah.
I liked my school, but I was just sort of fantasizing and dreaming about how nice that would be to be in a, crowd of people who,
Right, date whoever I want.
Look like me, and that too. Yeah, exactly. So it was just kind of cool.
Yeah.
What else comes to mind? Oh, I do remember junior or senior year, I remember taking typing classes, and I had a business education teacher, again, an older white lady. And I was really good at typing. I was fast. I hardly made any errors. I was really good. And one day she said to me, I don't know what you're thinking about after high school, but I would really encourage you to go to a business school instead, a business ed school instead of college. Because, you could do really well and, wind up getting a good job. And I think, if you went to college, you might end up being disappointed. And it was like the strangest comment, which I knew to ignore.
Yeah.
But it was almost, she said it in such a way that she thought she was being kind, kind of warning me that it was, and to this day, I'm not sure how much of that was she didn't want my expectations to be raised and only to be shot down, and how much of that was you just don't belong at a higher station.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it was just one of those things I just ignored. The vast majority of my teachers were wonderful, and except for that biology teacher,
right.
And this one, my teachers were very supportive, thought the world of me. Everybody loved Eric Rothschild, and Eric Rothschild, just remembered everybody. Every reunion, he knew everybody by name. And he was great. Mr. Hazeltine, the drama, coach, he was great. There was a woman I had for math. I actually started college as a math major because I really enjoyed math. I was good at it. And there was an older woman teacher. You're too young to remember the Archie comics and Mrs. Grundy.
I know of it, but I don't know the ancillary characters.
So anyway, she was this really old-fashioned older lady with glasses, a bun in the back of her head, and she was very supportive of me and really encouraged me. So I really liked her a lot. So there were, just overall, it was a good education. It was a good education, a good environment. I made good friends. And not people that I communicate with frequently, these days, but, it's always great when we come back at reunions and we have a lot of reminiscences. What else can I tell you? And I hope I'm giving you some of what you're looking for.
This is great because it's different than I think people would say even 10 years later. And
Yeah.
and it may be different because you are a young woman. I don't know how we can tease out that factor. But
Yeah, no, I think, well, there's that, but there's also things that changed. I mean, I know people who went to, Scarsdale High, maybe just, 7 years, later, who at that point, affirmative action had come along.
okay.
And they experienced more resentment from white classmates in terms of, oh, you just got into that college because of affirmative action, and that, they experienced that kind of thing. That didn't exist in my day. And by the way, I'm just to give you a sense, oh, you know all this already. I finished in '67. Born in 1950, and so just to give you a sense of timing. And I think, and not only were backing up it was me in the high school, me, Helen, Sharon, and Denise. And Denise was the half, the biracial child. That was us in senior year. Jerry was a junior. There was one year, maybe my junior year, where briefly there was another boy at a younger grade level. I don't think he was there even for a full year, but somehow I later learned that he was the child of a live-in household help working in Scarsdale. And so, because they were Scarsdale residents, he went to Scarsdale schools.
Right.
But he was just there, I want to say less than a year. I can't even remember his name. And there hadn't been, before Helen, Sharon, and I got to the high school in '63, I don't think there had been a Black kid in the high school since maybe George Peterson, who, I'm blanking on how much older George would have been. I barely knew George. I remember his mom more than I remember him because he was long gone by the time he was grown.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure of the years exactly, but yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it would have come from, most likely, those four homes right there.
right, exactly. Yeah, but it had been a number of years. So even most teachers in high school had not experienced a Black kid ever at that point. Now, Rashid, interestingly enough, as I said, I met Rashid when I was in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was at Syracuse, he was at Colgate.
Huh.
And moved, anyway, long story about Rashid's journey, which he might have shared. And it was just years later, I discovered, oh, and this is interesting. My parents, it must have been around the 1980s, I'm thinking. They went to, by that time, there were a number of, there was more Black families in Scarsdale. And they went to the home of one family that was hosting the Black teachers in the Scarsdale system, because the Black teachers had been trying to get the school system to hire more Black teachers.
Right.
So my parents met Rashid, who of course was doing most of the talking. Rashid. So they met Rashid, and they were telling me later, oh, we met this guy, blah, 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 blah. I said, wait a minute, I know that guy. So that's how I discovered Rashid was working at my high school. But interestingly, I know a few people who have since had, Black people who had their Black kids in the high school during Rashid's era, who would talk about how Rashid, whether you were in one of his classes or not, when a Black kid arrived at the high school, he always sought them out. And I don't know if he shared this with you or not, but he would seek them out. He would just, let them know that he was there for them if they ever wanted to come and talk about anything, any concerns they had about anything that was going on, without being heavy-handed about it or Of course, he was just letting them know I'm here. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I wish I had had a Rashid when I was in high school.
Yeah.
That just would have been interesting. But yeah, he was very well regarded as you know, by everybody, white, black, you know, whatever.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What else? So in terms of other experiences, the only time I can remember a direct racial slur, remark, and I think this was high school. I remember walking down a hallway one day. There were two boys who passed me coming in the other direction, and two white guys. One of them, after they passed me, making some, I can't remember what the remark was, but some form of ridicule about me that was obviously racial. And I remember that was hurtful. And it was a boy I had known since elementary school. And I have a feeling he was just trying to impress his buddy. But that was hurtful. I can't remember what exactly the remark was, but I just remember being very hurt by that.
Yeah.
But that's the only time I can remember somebody directly saying something offensive. Interestingly, I think you said that this topic, you thought of this as a subject for your presentation because of things that have been going on this summer, I presume, with Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. And I was reminded that at some point after I was long gone, or maybe halfway gone, either in college or maybe I was in grad school, but I remember my father telling me about being stopped by the police, I think on Mamaroneck Avenue, just as he was getting ready to turn onto Saxon Woods Road. He was probably driving a nice car, and he was stopped by the police and asked, where he thought he was going and, that sort of thing. And nothing, violent happened, thank God, but he was questioned and he had to, I'm Dr. Moore, with a capital D, I live on Saxon Woods Road. And he just had to, prove himself just to be able to, drive down the street. And I just remember being so furious and furious about what happened and furious because my father didn't seem more furious. In retrospect, he was probably more furious than he let on, on the inside.
Right.
But that was just painful. Yeah. So I think that's all I can think of offhand.
You mentioned.
If you have specific questions, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned your dad, and so when I look through all the old Inquirers, your mom and dad are standouts for their civic involvement. And I'm torn between two kind of contradictory thoughts about their extensive involvement. On the one hand, it's the most typical thing to do in Scarsdale, suburban or whatever. You get involved in your community. On the other hand, I would think that it would require some either courage or at least self-confidence to be the first Black man in the town club, to be the first Black person, as your mom was, on the Advisory Council on Human Relations. Mm-hmm. Do you, knowing what you know about them, did it take bravery? Was it just matter of fact? How did they go about their involvement?
That's a good question. My guess is you had a very strong component of white liberals in the town.
Okay.
So I don't think my parents were necessarily go-getters or, I have a feeling people came to them and recruited them to take on certain roles. That's what I suspect mainly happened. If anything, I think my father was a little bit, he considered it an honor to be invited to be in the town club, but at the same time, I think was, a little reticent about it, a little nervous about it. But yeah, my mom, I had forgotten about the human rights. I remembered her being on the Fair Housing Committee, most definitely. and involved in Scouts. And, she comes from a town where parents are very involved in whatever their kids are doing, certainly. And, but yeah, I think it was a lot of recruitment involved. And we were members of Scarsdale Congregational Church. Mom is still a member. When we come back to New York, we visit the church. And right now, she is probably the longest serving member of the church. Most of her contemporaries are gone, right. So she is like revered whenever she shows up at church. It's like, she's like that. But I can remember through those church connections, they were befriended by the family that the guy who was president of Scarsdale National Bank, which is now, Chase, rolled into Chase, befriended by the people who owned Ralston Purina Company. I mean, we were invited to dinner all the time, and and so there were a lot of people who were like, happy to have, to reach out and have, my parents be included in stuff. So that was a good thing.
Did you ever have any dinner parties or parties at your house that you remember?
Yeah. I wouldn't say we entertained a lot, but yeah, we had people over, most definitely. And it was a nice, kind of a small town vibe. I mean, as a young person, I couldn't wait to get out of this small town.
Yeah, that's everyone.
Yeah. But in retrospect, it was really a very nurturing, comforting kind of place for the most part. It really was. And the kind of place where if you went to the grocery store at 4:30 in the afternoon, you would, be sure to run into Francine Firestein, who, lived in the neighborhood and, walking distance and always picked up dinner, just fresh every night. She shopped on a daily basis. So it was a nice atmosphere in that respect that I think we all enjoyed. And, did Rashid or anybody else tell you about the STEP program?
Yes, and I want to, I have an email into them. I mean, I already knew about them, but either way, Rashid gave me an extra little push. I want to talk to like the first STEP person, and then a more recent one.
The first one I remember, Geraldine.
Right.
Geraldine, I can't think of the last name. But for starters, my mother was on the first STEP committee, advisory board, whatever. She was part of that whole developmental process. They had a 50th anniversary thing in 2017 that I remember we attended.
Oh, okay.
Because Rashid was being honored, for one thing, but and a lot of the past graduates came back. Now you're really going on into a tangent now, George, when you get into the STEP kids, because they're
not really
per se. They had a short period of time, but still, their perspective would be interesting. But I remember, I think Geraldine, the first STEP student, started. We didn't overlap. The year I graduated was the year she started. Okay. But I did meet her a couple of times when I came home on vacations. But yeah, that a very interesting program. A lot of those kids have gone on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, no kidding. Some amazing accomplishments.
Yeah. So it was the kind of community that would embrace a STEP, for example. That gives you a sense of. I imagine there were some people in the community that weren't big on all these liberal, kinds of things progressive things that were going on, but there was such a critical mass of people who were, that I think, most of us felt, quite included for the most part.
Do you recall your mom, or more recently, either expressing satisfaction or dissatisfaction about progress made by the Scarsdale Fair Housing Group?
No, haven't heard. I don't remember any, talk about that really since after we left. And Mom, by the way, left. My father passed in '99, and my mom sold the house in 2001, and moved to Greenburgh. She's in, but she still has a place. She's with me for the most part now, but she still has her place in Greenburgh.
Hmm.
And, but yeah, interesting. And, in retrospect, I realized, we couldn't have lived anywhere in Scarsdale at that time, probably. And it didn't really strike me. I didn't even think about it until I'm in Massachusetts now, and I've met a few people, among who graduated from Scarsdale, before me, after me, whatever. But there's one woman, a Jewish woman, who I think she finished high school the year I started.
Okay.
But she talked about having moved to Scarsdale in the third grade, and from Queens, I think. And her family moved to just a few blocks away from where I lived, but they were in the Quaker Ridge district. And she pointed out to me, she said, my parents wanted to come to Scarsdale, because of the good school system, blah, blah, blah. But that part of Scarsdale was the only place that we were allowed to buy. And I thought, oh, okay, if that's the only place you were allowed to buy,
Yeah.
that was the only place we were allowed to buy. So I thought that was interesting. And then in retrospect, I remembered that Heathcote School, Quaker Ridge, in those days, that's where most of the Jewish population came from. It wasn't until I got to junior high that Jews were slightly in the minority.
Yeah.
So yeah, Fox Meadow and Green Acres, and those were more Gentile neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I guess Edgewood being a little more Catholic, right?
Correct, because of IHM. So
exactly.
It's wound up being. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, now Edgewood is very international. A lot of Scarsdale is very international.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe coming up through like the 70s and the 80s, when the Japanese companies were buying houses and then cycling business through every 3 years, Edgewood being, I think, the usual spot for that.
And speaking of which, there were a number of Japanese kids at the high school when I was there. When I say a number, probably more Japanese than Black students, but not by much. But I can remember in later years, visiting my parents in Scarsdale and coming up on the train from the city. Sometimes I'd come up on the train on a Friday night, and it was like, is this train going to Tokyo? It was like everybody on the train. And so, yeah, it's interesting how that grew. And I don't know if George mentioned this or he was even aware of it, but Mr. Parnell, Jasper, George's father, George was our neighborhood, he was our political person. And
George or Jasper?
Jasper,
right? Yeah.
Jasper. Whenever there was some issue, some complaint, some whatever, it was Jasper who would go to town. And specifically, I remember, and I don't know who he had to go to make this happen, but again, when Saxon Woods Road was fairly isolated and cut off from the rest of Scarsdale, we had White Plains mailing addresses.
Oh, okay.
So, because all the mail was, came from Mamaroneck Avenue and, that way up to, our houses. And Jasper in particular took offense at that. It's like, oh, the Black people can't have a Scarsdale address. And so it was Jasper who fought to get us Scarsdale mailing addresses.
Yeah, I'll send you the link to George's video. He says his dad went down to D.C. with a bunch of other Scarsdale people to have an appointment with the Postmaster General. I don't know if it was a full-on guy or an underling or whatever, but he mentioned D.C. And he described that as being one of the things about Scarsdale that if you either had power and privilege or could piggyback on someone else's power or privilege, you could get stuff done like that.
Yeah.
I know also Jasper, this would have been later in the 70s. He went to a village meeting and said, we've got these lawn jockeys. It's not cool.
That's right. That's right.
And the high school kids offered to paint them, to
Yeah.
repaint them.
I remember that.
And there was something else with later, this would have been after you left, I think there were some issues with whether to pave and widen Saxon Woods Road that the Black residents did not want because they didn't want it to be a thoroughfare.
Yeah.
But that still went through. And then there was also something with a sewer assessment that was going to like force that little cluster there, the Peterson, the whole Purdy area that was going to, and they quashed that as saying that's not cool because some of them were even on septic up through the 70s.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're going to give them some whopping assessment. It's going to force them out. And I think people knew that wasn't cool.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So I always admired Mr. Parnell for that.
And he was, when you knew him, was he a caterer or what did he have was he doing something else? Do you recall what he was doing then? I didn't ask George what he did later.
I don't, I remember at one point, and I don't know whether that was a second job or what, but I remember at one point he was a toll taker on was it the Merritt Parkway?
Huh. That's very interesting.
But what else? And there was part of me was thinking he was a house painter, but maybe not. And I think Mrs. Parnell, I think she was a teacher.
Yes, she was a teacher
in Tarrytown, maybe.
Yes, and in fact, Jerry, I think he finished up high school there because George said he had such not great experiences with some teachers, including one of them who gave him the insult, "You're going to wind up just being a toll taker."
Ooh.
And I didn't realize that was...
Oh, maybe that was the connection. Wow.
But
yeah, I was thinking to myself, I don't remember Jerry being there consistently at Scarsdale High.
Yeah, and then others of the Parnells went to boarding school. Until like Groton and stuff like that, which is mind-blowing. But that family, the juxtaposition, well, I don't know, it's not your two families, your family being white-collar professional, and their family being blue/pink collar, but you wind up basically close to across the street from each other is interesting. But it's interesting that Jasper took on that mantle. I think some of it may have come from, you'll see George's thing about fighting in World War II, and coming back. Well, for not fighting, he was actually teaching, but he was in the army, and then coming back and being like, I think this might have been true for other Black people as well, being like, all right, we did all this. I'm going to come back and put up with this. That doesn't seem right. Right.
Yeah.
But I'll send you the link because I think you'll find it really interesting.
Yeah.
Even a few years later, but it's gonna complete the circuit for some stuff, I'm sure, in your mind as well. But my family, I mean, we always admired, Mr. Parnell because he was getting stuff done, and he didn't, that was great. And my father being a little more mild-mannered. I mean, earlier in his, when he was in the service, he was he waged some protests, but my father has a little quieter way of, doing things, and Mr. Parnell, not quite so quiet, but he was, he got stuff done. I was impressed. Yeah. And it's only now that, and, it was later on that I realized, the changing of the address is not so insignificant. I mean, when it comes to property values and the way, as I work in real estate, I get that, Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, a lot is in a name.
But anyway, I really appreciate your time and your preparation for this. And thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. It was nice taking a trip down memory lane.
Oh, good. I'm glad you got onto it. All right.
Good luck.
Yeah, say hi to your mother as well.
I will.
All right.
Okay. Take care,
night.
Jordan. Bye.
Bye.